Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 71 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Well, we do indeed live in exciting times. And of course, the Chinese didn't exactly mean that as a compliment. But there's so much going on, it's almost a question of where to start, and we could be putting out a show every night of the week. But tonight, I'm joined by two very interesting guests. One who has been with us on a couple of occasions before and is back in the UK. This is none other than my good friend, Max Igan. So Max is online, and I must confess, he looks like he's broadcasting from a cell there. So I hope that's not a sign of things to come. But good evening, Max.
How are you, Ian? Nice to be on. Always a pleasure to come and talk to you, mate.
Thanks a lot.
It just looks like it. It's an interesting room that I'm in, but it kind of, with the lighting, it does look very cell-like. So, yeah, hopefully it isn't a...
Well, like I say, the only thing that's missing there really is it looks like the bars. But it's a pleasure to have you back in the UK. And, of course, you'll be joining us at AB7 this coming weekend. You've come back by popular demand. And actually, I think there's a couple of people that have actually made the trip all the way over from Australia to see you. So... That's going to be a good weekend.
It's interesting they would come all the way to England to see me when they come from Australia, which is where I live. But that's great that they have. I'm looking forward to the event. It should be a good event. It was great last year, and I'm really looking forward to connecting with everyone again. Excellent.
Well, on the other line, we've got Daniel Dungate from Cyprus. And despite rumours circulating, it's not true that he's a former senior officer of the Bank of Cyprus. But he can explain to us why it is that he's chosen to base himself in Cyprus. But Daniel is, let's say, has a very interesting take on the global financial arena. And we're going to be talking to Daniel in particular about how he sees things unfolding, particularly over the coming months. His prognosis for the short and medium term. And he's also going to offer some counsel as to what you might be able to do with any assets that you may have and maybe worried about hanging on to as the forecast financial collapse seems to edge somewhat closer, but maybe not in the ways in which we had anticipated a few years ago. So Daniel, welcome to Humanity versus Insanity.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks for inviting me on. It's my favourite subject, so you'll have to stop me if I talk too much.
It's okay. Hey, listen, sadly, of course, on this programme, we tend to focus a little too much, perhaps, on the insanity. But, of course, it's like all things. If you don't actually know what's occurring, it's very difficult to do anything about it. So, this is really more about trying to stimulate people's curiosity. We don't profess to have the definitive answers or solutions to anything, but if we can stimulate people's curiosity to do their own research and come to their own determination as to how they ride this coming storm, then who knows, maybe one of them might actually find the panacea that gets us out of this mess. But Daniel, the floor is yours. Give us a little bit of a background into how you see us having got to where we are today.
I will do, and it's a good question, because I always think it's useful to look back, if you like, to find out how we've actually got here. People throw around numbers like quadrillion and trillion, and it gets a bit confusing after a while. But if we know how we've got here and we know what's going on, then we can have at least an educated guess about where we're going to be going forward. And what I'd like to do, if I may, I'm going to take you through about 300 years of financial history in 5 minutes. So I'm going to leave a lot out for the sake of poetic license, so read between the lines, but it will just give you a rough idea about how we got here today.
Shoot.
Okay. Money, first of all. What is money? Money is a means of exchange and a store of value. So anything that can store value and can be exchanged for goods and services, if you like, can be described as money. For 6,000 years, gold and silver was used as money. And the first Bank of England, if you like, set up in the 1700s, was backed by gold and silver. Germany had similar systems. You could take your money to the bank and you could exchange it for physical gold and silver. And what that did really was prevent too much money printing. It sort of kept prices stable, prevented too much money printing, and allowed a reasonably stable economic system. Gold, if you like, has been the key to our financial system throughout the world, throughout history. At the end of the Second World War, gold, if you like, moves around the world with wherever the most prosperous nation states are. And America had come through both world wars, going into the wars at the back end of those wars, and consequently Europe and the rest of the world had spent most of its gold on fighting the wars. And all of the gold, or 3/4 of it at least, ended up in America at the end of the Second World War. And what that meant was that America effectively had no one else to trade with. So it couldn't trade with the rest of the world simply because the rest of the world didn't have any gold. So what was needed was a kind of new financial system to be created. And they did that through the Bretton Woods Agreement. Every nation state got together at Bretton Woods and they decided to back all of their currencies against the American dollar, which was in turn backed by gold, which was in Fort Knox. So if you like, we had a global system still backed by gold. If you had a Zimbabwean dollar, it was backed by gold because it was backed by the American dollar. So it worked quite well initially until around 1971. After the Vietnam War, America started printing too much money. France got upset and said, you know what, we're going to change our currency for gold. And they started going back to America and saying, look, we don't trust you, you're printing too much money, we want our gold back and we're going to give you our currency back. The rest of the world saw what was happening, followed suit, and within a very short amount of time, about 1/3 of the American gold had gone. Nixon at that time took us off the gold standard, and from that moment on, the world for the first time in history went over to what is called fiat currency, which is Latin for let it be. So now currency wasn't backed by anything at all. It was simply currency because we said it's going to be currency. That created a bit of a problem. Obviously, it left the American dollar in a very precarious situation. So they dispatched Henry Kissinger to Saudi Arabia. I think you've worked there, Ian, haven't you?
Well, I worked in the Middle East and I've certainly visited Saudi a number of times, yes.
Well, there you go. They dispatched Henry Kissinger to Saudi Arabia. It was reasonably backward at the time, and they did a deal with the Saudis, who had a lot of oil, and they said, look, we will build your oil wells for you. We'll establish the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, as long as you do two things for us. One is that you always buy American debt, and two, that you always trade oil in American dollars. And that was a key to the American success since 1971, because what it's allowed America to do is to be the reserve currency of the world. Because if you're Guatemala, for example, and you don't produce oil, in order to get that oil, you have to produce physical goods like grow potatoes, sell it on the international market in order to get American dollars in order to buy oil. And so every nation state needs American dollars. And that's allowed America to consume far more than it actually produces. America isn't technically a great country because they're wonderful people and very industrious, although they are. It's a great country because it can print money at will, and every other nation state has to purchase that money. And that's what's allowed this massive debt creation and expansion from America, if you like, because they're printing dollars. The rest of the world needs them in order to buy oil. And it's called the petrodollar system, and it's the system that we work under today. Interestingly, in 2000, there were only 7 nation states that didn't have a privately owned central bank, and they were Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Venezuela, North Korea, Libya, Syria, and Cuba. None of those countries had a privately owned central bank, and if you look around the world today, they're the countries we're at war with, if you like. America backs its fiat currency, if you like, or backs its currency with its military. It's got one of the largest militaries in the world. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein wanted to start trading oil outside of the American dollar in euros. In Libya, Gaddafi wanted to start trading oil in an African gold dinar and start a pan-African currency. And anytime any nation tries to extradite itself from this global petrodollar system, the American military can go in. And that's the kind of system that we've been left with today. This global system, backed by the American dollar, backed by the American military, and it's effectively what's running the world today.
And of course, as you rightly say, the two world wars that we had were contrived, and one of the major reasons was to effect exactly what you described, i.e., America hoovering up the resources across the rest of the planet.
It could be said that was the case. Certainly, it's enabled American hegemony since the Second World War. Depending on who you read, what America does is it goes into third world nation states. It says, look, we're the American dollar. I can see you need an infrastructure in your country. We'll lend you a certain amount of money. There's a couple of million for your good self. And it lends enough money to third world nations just to keep them forever indebted to the American dollar and to the American as a country. And in that way, it can manipulate most nation states, if you like. Coupled with fractional reserve banking, which is now global, which I can describe if you want me to, that is really what has led to so much debt creation since the Second World War.
Well, and of course, this is the ability of the banks to literally print money out of nothing. And, basically people think that when they take out a mortgage, they're actually getting money that the bank already had. But of course, they're not, are they?
No. When you take out a mortgage, if you have a 100,000 mortgage, what you're actually doing is creating 100,000 in debt. I mean, it's amazing to say, but I'll say this twice. All money is created as debt at interest. So by privately owned central banks, except for the countries that I previously mentioned, most banks are privately owned. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned institution issuing money as debt. If they paid off all the debt in the world, there would be no money. There would only be debt left. So we've got a system that creates money out of nothing, if you like, at interest. So they might charge 5% interest on the debt. And take England, for example. If we issued money in England, if England issues money, it's money that has to be paid back. So when they start saying, well, we're going to increase debt ceilings, et cetera, all of that money has to be paid back at some point by the general public.
Now, Max, I know that you and I and a number of other people were talking about exactly these issues about 8-9 years ago, and in some, as other people have been talking about them even longer. And, on the other line here, we've got a respected financier talking about the stuff that when we spoke about it nearly a decade ago, we were labelled as conspiracy theorists.
Well, that's the way of the world, isn't it? We've been calling this for years. This is the way the system's run. And it's designed to implode. It's designed to enslave people to a system of fictional debt. Now, the system works in only one fashion. That is provide scarcity to people and keep them enslaved to the system. And as your other guest has said, they've gone out and trashed every country that doesn't have a central bank and won't comply to this system. And we're seeing it getting tightened up, like in every country. They're doing everything they can to screw the people and to get cash out of the equation. Even in Australia now, like there's vast limits on PayPal. I've had an enormous amount of trouble trying to get my PayPals to work. I don't even have a PayPal account that I can use anymore. Foundation to stop people, private people having private foundations. They only want the big wigs to do this. So they're doing everything they can to screw the people out and get them locked into this digital currency system, which will be, if they do that, if they manage to get us locked into a digital currency system, then they can switch you off. They can switch it off anytime. All of your wealth suddenly becomes virtual. I mean, as if it isn't already. I mean, even your ownership of land is, you don't own any of the land that people think they own. Nothing is the way it's presented as being. But if it manages to go digital, then they can just complete control. So that's something we've really, really got to pay attention to. But it is interesting to see people like your guest here just laying it all out exactly the way it is, exactly the way it's been set up, and exactly what these whole theatre wars have all been about. And we have been calling this for years, and I think the people of the world are now beginning to see that something's wrong, and they're beginning to wonder how we got here, and how we got here is exactly how your guest has explained.
So, Daniel, it's actually really quite gratifying, perversely, I have to say, to see, you know, somebody from the world of finance actually now laying it out as, say, you know, some of us have been trying to lay it out for a decade plus. And I have to say that we've definitely got a lot more traction since the collapse of 2007, 2008, because obviously it's up close and personal. So, you know, this debt that we're now describing, and, you know, I think we've got a slide here that shows, you know, some of the magnitude of the debt around the world. Now, it's obviously small print here, but I mean, basically, this is pretty much every country in the world and every country in debt. But, you know, when you've got a banking system that has the capacity literally just to print money, which is why the US has, you know, the most powerful military on the planet. It's why they're able to spend such an enormous amount of their GDP on the military. Because it doesn't really matter. The GDP doesn't matter, does it? Because they could just keep printing the currency.
No, absolutely. You know, we are in a bit of a predicament at the moment. It seems like this system that we've currently got has worked very well since the Second World War. And it's worked well because we've had a lot of resources, we've had a lot of development, and we've been printing money, paying the interest on the debt, paying the interest on the debt. 2008 essentially happened because we could no longer pay the interest on the debt. It is a Ponzi scheme. It's a mathematical Ponzi scheme. We print money, pay the interest on the debt, and at some point, there's too much debt and we simply can't pay the interest. We work under a system since 1933 of what is called Keynesian economics, and that means print more money, spend it into the economy, raise taxes, pay the debt, do the same again. Now, that's great, but as long as you're growing the base of debt, at some point that falls apart. And that's why you see countries, they need to grow economically. You need to have 3%, 4% growth so that we can pay the interest on the debt. Now, it's an interesting point because what we've got a financial system that demands perpetual economic growth. It demands perpetual development. But we live on a finite planet. And at some point, those two forces have to come together. We've got a finite amount of resources that we can use with an economic system that demands perpetual growth. And I think we're coming to a point now where those two forces are coming together. There's too much debt, which is why we've got very, very low interest rates. We can't put them up anymore. If we had 8% interest rates, America would have to spend its entire GDP just to pay the interest. So the interest rates can't go up. They're starting to charge us at the banks just for holding money in the bank. And we're getting very, very near to the end game. I can't tell you when that's going to be. It could be tomorrow. It could be 3 months. It could be 3 years. The roots go very deep, if you like.
Because negative interest rates, I mean, we've always had, to some extent, this erosion of wealth through inflation. And those people who were able to actually sort away some of their hard-earned cash were generally able to find accounts where at least the return was a couple of percentage points above the rate of inflation. But now, of course, I mean, inflation is almost zero or very, very low. So there's no interest to be offered. And in fact, what you've got is effectively a kind of almost deflation, which is potentially dangerous in of itself.
I think it's dangerous for us all. It's very difficult now to find anywhere. If you remember my definition of money, a store of value and a means of exchange. And it's very difficult to find anywhere now to store value. You see the house prices going up, asset prices going up, old car values going up. Anywhere that can store value at the moment, those prices are rising because increasingly money is becoming worth less and less, if you like. And it's very difficult for individuals to know which way to turn. The reason I'm in Cyprus and the reason my company exists is because we believe there's inevitably some sort of global economic reset coming, and what we're trying to do is remove as much money from the banks before bail-ins happen, trying to allocate assets towards physical assets, towards places that will store value outside of people's home countries where asset confiscation, wealth confiscation, increasing taxation is going to erode all of that capital.
And
so
of
that's
course,
what we're trying
Cyprus actually is the only country at the moment to have had the bail-in, isn't it?
Well, it's the epicenter, and we very strongly believe that it was a global template, if you like. It was a template for the rest of the world. And the reason that we say that is that the G20 just gone in Brisbane has legalized bail-ins, Cyprus-style bail-ins.
Exactly.
What they're saying now is, look, what we're going to do, we're not going to, if a bank gets into trouble, we're not going to pass that on to the taxpayer. What we're going to do is take it from the creditors, and the creditor is me and you. If you go to a bank today and you give them $100,000, legally now that money becomes the bank's property, and they can pay their debts off with your money should they choose to do so. You become an unsecured creditor. The insurance that we're told we have, both from the Americans and the European Union and in the UK, is virtually worthless. It's in the UK, it's worth the UK's 16th largest bank. It would cover anything above that. You're not going to get any money back, if you like. They're simply going to turn your capital into bank stock, and it's happened here in Cyprus. We believe strongly it's going to happen elsewhere, and it's going to happen globally.
Yeah, the legislation was actually accelerated in the EU. It was brought forward under direction of the Council of Ministers, so that now it is EU law that basically the bail-in process can be applied as needed. Max.
Absolutely.
Max, we're looking at a situation here that really doesn't bode well for people who have traditionally put their money in the banks. Most people now, though, and I say most people, I'm talking percentage-wise, are literally working to just provide the basic, was it the Maslow hierarchy of needs? The basics, the roof over the head, the food on the table.
Well, yeah, basically they are. And if they're going to take these people's bank accounts, and it's going to bode very badly for these people. And they're talking about doing this in Australia as well. They're talking about bail-ins, and it is threatened. So, people have got to look at where else to put their money. That's the question. Where else do you put it? Perhaps things like silver or whatever, or perhaps your guest has some ideas where people could put their money, but we are going to see this. I think they're preparing for it. This is why they're removing all the notes. Like you say, they're removing the €500 note. They're talking about removing $100 notes. They're really trying to get people out of this cash situation and get them into a digital situation where, like you say, they can just simply bail in any bank they want, and you don't have any control over it all because you have no physical assets. Suddenly all of your assets become virtual, all your financial assets anyway. And this is a great danger for the entire Western world. And it's just another way they control people and squeeze them out of all their wealth and squeeze them out of any hope that they have of finding a way out of this mess. This is what we're seeing right across the United States already, the way that people are being squeezed out financially and economically, and they're just bringing it to every country that they can. So it's great that you've got a guest like this on to bring this to the attention of the people, because it's really good to have someone of a bit of a reputation, a bit of a repute to put this out there and say what we have been saying for years, to watch out for this economic system, because it is designed to implode. And like you say, it's going to happen any day. The question is when. It isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because it has to happen.
Exactly. So Daniel, let's move on to prognosis. What is your counsel to people? And let's try and address all parts of the spectrum. Those people that are literally struggling just to provide the basics for their family, the roof over the head, the food on the table. To those that have a spare buck or three and would actually like to prevent it from ending up as a part of a bail-in.
Clearly. Increasingly, as I say, the alternatives are getting narrowed down. We live in a financial world. We live increasingly in a digital world. So a lot of assets are based in physical cash, if you like, stocks and shares, bonds. Stocks are at an all-time high. Bonds are at a 500-year high, and cash obviously is under threat in banks. What we're doing here is we're using insurance companies, which work very, very differently to banks. It's a little-known fact that you can actually bank with an insurance company. If you go along to some of the companies that we work with, they will give you a base capital guarantee and a return on investment, and that guarantee comes from the insurance company, which is beneficial because assets match liabilities with an insurance company. If everybody came to the insurance company and said, you know what, can I have my money back? the insurance company would be able to pay everybody out, plus have what is called a solvency margin over and above in order to keep going. So they've got the money. The money's yours, it's ring-fenced, it's in your name, it's segregated from the insurance company itself, it legally belongs to you. The insurance company can't lend it out to third parties, as banks can do, of course, because they work on a fractional reserve basis. So if you give your money to the bank, they've only got 2% of that money, which is why, of course, you have to order the money up when you go in and ask for it at the bank. So what we're doing with both physical assets, existing physical assets, and cash, we're wrapping it in insurance, getting it outside of the client's home country, Luxembourg or Switzerland, and it's much, much safer. Obviously, not everybody has the power to do that, although from 25, we can work with 25,000 US and up with cash, if you like. Gold and silver is obviously a big subject. It has been used as money for the last 6,000 years. I've been hurt on gold and silver over the last 5 years. Many other people have. I think it's important to remember that the price of gold and silver is heavily manipulated. Deutsche Bank 2 weeks ago came out and admitted that they had been manipulating gold and silver. Goldman Sachs 2 years prior also admitted it. The reason is faith in the American dollar must be kept. And gold and silver is an alternative currency. And if gold and silver goes up significantly, then it looks as if the American dollar is weak. So that is why the price has been continued to manipulate down. It's at mining costs at the moment, there or thereabouts, both gold and silver. Pretty much globally, every asset class is inflated except for gold and silver. There are risks involved. You're going into an asset class that is effectively manipulated, and you know it's manipulated. You're going into an asset class that could face confiscation. It has faced confiscation in the past. But it is a store of value, and a 10%, 20% asset allocation into physical gold, physical silver is very prudent, There's a massive, as after the Second World War, all the gold ended up in America, in Fort Knox, there's a massive physical transition of physical gold from the West to the East, to China, to Russia, to India. The BRICS nations, they're all buying the physical gold. And I believe the end game will come when the West can no longer deliver physical gold. And at that point, you'll see a divergence in the paper price and the physical price. And those holding physical gold and physical silver will have the last laugh when that day finally comes. And I think it is a day that's coming. I mean, look at the central banks. China doesn't spend money for nothing. It's buying massive amounts of gold. India's buying, Russia's buying. So the central banks globally are purchasing gold. And if they're purchasing it, well, you know, that's a good indication that it's a good bet.
So, Max, now what Daniel has just described is almost civilized, you know, this sort of transition of the gold from the West to the East, but call it a hunch. But I would say that the neocons in particular are not just going to sit back and allow that to happen.
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, that's why they're ramping up all these wars and everything they're doing. I mean, this beast is going to go down fighting and kicking and screaming. You can bet your bottom dollar on that one. It's going to be no easy transition, whatever the transition is. But it is almost civilized that it's been transferring. But what people have got to realise is once it does run out of gold, the debt's still there. You know, once the US runs out of gold to transfer, the debt's still going to be there. And if you look at the United States now, it's virtually owned by China anyway. And a lot of, even in Australia, China owns so much of Australia now. The laws they're bringing in there to prevent people protesting, or the amount of repression they're getting there, you've got to look at what's coming down the pipe that is going to require these laws. You know, and if the financial system does crash and people can't pay their debts, well, then you'll find that most Western countries, particularly the United States and Australia, are already owned by China, and they're simply going to come in and collect on their debts. And you've got the police and the laws already in place to prevent the people from being able to do really anything about it. So you really look at it as a chess game and look at where the dominoes are being set up, and you can see that the people are being set up for a fall. And I think that this crash is probably, you know, quite close. I'd expect it to come any time in the next 3 years.
Well, at the outset here, we talked about the magnitude of the debt, and I just want to show you a couple of graphics that Daniel sent through to me. First of all, we look at the magnitude of the public debt, and of course the US debt has ramped up from just 6 trillion, but 6 trillion in 2001 at the time of 9/11. And so literally in the last not even 15 years, it's trebled up to just shy of 19 trillion. And that's just the visible debt. This graphic that I have to say that shocked me, just in terms of the physical size of what the debt looks like. And the US's long-term debt is estimated to be $238 trillion. Well, $1 trillion says here, if you stack $100 bills on a standard pallet, that's 4 foot by 3'4" by 4 foot high, you need 1,000 pallets with 100 million on each pallet to equal $1 trillion. And if you actually put this into this kind of graphic, the Twin Towers of debt. I mean, this is so far beyond most people's comprehension or even their perception that they can't get their head around the fact that this debt is absolutely irreplaceable. It's non-returnable, isn't it? Nobody can ever repay this debt. So either, you said, Daniel, we have a reset. Now, how do you see that reset coming?
Well, that's a difficult question. Firstly, can I just quickly say that I strongly agree with what Max was saying, that it probably won't be civilized. America's got 80 bases, 150 bases in 80 countries around the world. China owns 33% of the arable land in Africa, 10% or 20% of the land mass in America. And increasingly what it's doing is getting rid of its American dollars to buy physical assets because it knows what's coming. What is coming, it's very difficult to say. We've never had an event like it. Certainly if the American dollar loses its reserve currency status, it will be the biggest event in human history. It will be the first event to touch every single human life on the planet, because the American dollar is so ubiquitous globally, and we've never had a financial system as interconnected as this. Certainly the situation we've got at the moment is every other country is having to buy American debt, and so in effect is paying for the American wars. It's not the Americans paying for it, it's the Chinese, it's the Japanese, it's every other nation state that has to buy its debt. Some sort of new financial system will have to be put in place. It's not uncommon. We had a new financial system at Bretton Woods. We've had 6 different reserve currencies since the 1400s. So these things do happen from time to time. It's my belief, looking at what's happening globally, is that we're going to get some form of global currency managed centrally, a global taxation system which is digital, with very limited cash and with a great amount of control for the powers that be. Again, I agree with Max. I think the world looks like it's going to war, and I say that because if the American dollar is losing its reserve currency status and America lets that go, what's going to happen is that China, Russia, India, the BRICS nations will gain supremacy. And America's not going to simply sit back and allow that to happen. What America has built with all these American dollars is the largest military machine in human history. And if it's going to lose its power base by losing its reserve currency status, it's very possible they're going to use that military in order to protect it. And I think perhaps those two things are going to coincide. Perhaps the economic collapse with some sort of military move. And certainly if you turn on the TV today, you see everything sort of ramping up and going that way, if you like.
So on that basis, I mean, obviously that might explain why there is such an acceleration towards establishing an EU military. I mean, the Dutch have effectively handed over command and control of their military to Germany. David Cameron is ramping up the fear that if the UK leaves the EU, then it will lose the mutual protective capability of the European military. So could it be that basically the game plan here is to establish effectively a North Atlantic Union of North America, i.e. Mexico, US, Canada, and meld that in with the EU to create this power bloc to contest the BRICS nations?
Well, that certainly seems to be the case. I mean, I agree with Max again that everyone's sort of jostling for space at the moment. Nation states are lining up behind either the BRICS nations or the European Union and America increasingly, and all of that seems to be happening behind the scenes. So there does seem to be a jostling for position, if you like. Prior to whatever might be coming down the tubes.
So, from bearing in mind everything we've been discussing here, what are your thoughts on the referendum? I mean, not that it really matters which way we vote, because I'm pretty damn sure the result's already been predetermined. Sure. But what are your thoughts? What would your recommendation to be, given the opportunity of an open and free vote?
Well, I mean, I think clearly. I mean, I agree with you. I think whatever they want to happen will happen. I mean, just look at Ireland. They voted and then they didn't like the decision, so they voted again. I think they'll get what they want. I mean, clearly I'd like to be out of the European Union. If I think in my lifetime what's happened since I was a child to the UK, most of our assets have been sold, most of our public utilities have been sold, our ports have been sold. We're in a situation where we walk out of our front doors, we're photographed 500 times. Our money is increasingly no longer our own. 86% of our laws are made from unelected officials in the European Union. I wonder, what is a nation state? A nation state surely must have borders and the ability to produce its own laws and its own patch of land that isn't owned by offshore companies. So are we even a nation state anymore? I mean, I would love to see England remove itself, but increasingly individual countries don't have the ability to operate independently outside of this global financial system that we've created. I mean, Iceland, I think, is a notable exception to that. It's done tremendously well.
As has Norway and Switzerland.
As has Norway and Switzerland to a certain extent. But, places like Libya that say, look, we're not going to play along. We want to have a gold-backed currency and an African currency. We're going to trade oil outside of the American dollar. They get invaded.
Yeah, I mean, anticipating Iceland is probably going to be invaded at some juncture. There'll be some pretext for it. That's for sure. Max, I mean, you're sitting obviously on the other side of the world, part of the time. Well, one way or another, you're the other side of the world, because you're either in Australia or in South America. I mean, from your perspective, as a dispassionate observer, I mean, what would your counsel be, as an objective assessment of Britain as part of the EU or Britain out of the EU?
Oh, look, you've got to get out of the EU. The EU's been designed to implode. It's been designed to just put a control grid together and milk all the wealth out of the countries and then implode the whole system. And if you look at that with combined with the migrant crisis and everything that's happening there now, the Kalergi plan and how this is all being run, which is a whole other show. It's not a good place to be. You don't want to be involved in the EU at all. I recommend England get right out of the EU and do something about these criminals you've got running this country. I mean, David Cameron's legislation that he's bringing in, his new extremism bill, he's basically, under the outlines and guidelines of that bill, he's basically labelled himself as an extremist and his Tory party as an extremist party. We've got to do something about these criminals that are running this world and running this system. It's disgusting, and it is coming home to everybody if the people don't wake up about it. And America's been totally set up for a fall. Just the indulgence in there, the way America throws away half of its food, it's just designed to milk this wealth of the world and give everybody its debt, and it can only go on for so long. And this also creates a certain animosity towards the American people from all of these other nations who are suffering because of the actions of America. And really, it's not the American people. They're really nice people, the American people. They're just kept completely in the dark and they're kept in a state of complete economic servitude to a frightening degree. And they can't, a lot of them are lost and they don't know how to do anything about it. But it's creating this whole global tension towards the United States. So most of the world's quite happy to watch this nation implode and then go in there for the pickings, and that's what it's sort of being set up to do. And as you say, all of our countries have been set up for this. China's moving in, it's buying assets all over the place. And we've got to stand up and call it and start calling these politicians out for what they've done, and get a little bit of accountability happening and realise that all this debt is fiction. It's all fiction. It's all been created to do exactly what it's doing. This has all been done by design, by banking interests who've been running this whole show for a very long time. And I think people are waking up to it. It's just formulating what the real plan is to get out of this mess. And that's why shows like this are so good, and that's why it's so good to have someone like Daniel on explaining this for people in such a concise manner.
Well,
so thank you.
Well, Max, I remember the first time I actually physically met you in the flesh. I was giving a presentation on the Gold Coast, and you remember there was a journalist there who had really tried to do a hit piece on me before I arrived, and he only stayed for about the first hour or so of my sessions. And then wrote a hit piece on me afterwards, yet sadly, pretty much everything I presented and this was 2011, sadly, everything I presented in 2011 has effectively come to pass.
Exactly. The Australia today is not the Australia that people knew as little as 12 months ago, certainly not back in 2011. It's a very, very different country now. The legal system has changed dramatically. Now people can be arrested in Australia simply on police hearsay. Police just have to simply say they believe someone to be a criminal, and they can arrest them for an unlimited amount of time, take them off the streets, can severely restrict their movements. And this is also being brought in for things such as tax evasion. If they think you owe them any tax at all, they will restrict your movements, put great limitations on you. So it's all about using this economic system to lock people down and control them. That's what it's always been about. And that's what America has been set up to do. And Australia has been basically set up as a mine. That's been the whole show right from the beginning. That's why they kept the population so low, and that's why they've sold most of it off, and now why they're bringing all this legislation in place. So it's coming down in all countries, and we have to wake up and do something about it while we still can. I think
that's the key element.
What the plan is,
Yeah, that's absolutely the key element. We got to get involved. We either sit on the sidelines and spectate. And basically, unfortunately, this is one game where the result is pretty well clear for all to see. Or we can get off the bench and actually get in and engage in the process and make sure we certainly don't go down without a fight. Daniel, yes. Are you planning on watching all this go down from Cyprus?
Well, my feeling is if it is going to go down, I might as well be somewhere where the sun shines and the sea is blue. So here's as good as anywhere, I think. I mean, clearly, I think when it does go down, it will all be a matter of geography. I mean, I'm fairly comfortable here and I've got a lot of social contacts and I'm going to make a stand here. But yeah, the European Union certainly isn't the best place to be. And neither is America. I would say one word for America. I do support America and I make a distinction between the government and the people. But if America falls, there is no more free world. And I support those people in America who are trying to do something to change what's very obviously happening.
Absolutely. We've got a long debate on that one, that's for sure. Well, guys, we're out of time. All we've done, of course, is scratch the surface. And as I've said many, many times, we don't profess to have the definitive view on anything. Our goal is simply to stimulate people's curiosity and not just sit back and read the rags of the Murdoch media, who will just lull you into a false sense of well-being that will effectively just lure people into their own self-destruction. We have a tremendous opportunity here. An absolutely outstanding opportunity. You have to ask yourself, would you rather know or not know? And if you know, then basically you have a choice. And that is, if you know, do you abdicate? Do you abdicate and say, you know what, there's nothing I can do? Well, that's what the establishment wants you to say. They want you to say, this is way too big for me. There's nothing I can do. I'll just roll over. On the other hand, the more of us that get involved, the more creativity that we bring to this, the better likelihood that the reset that Daniel talks about could be a reset that benefits humanity as opposed to benefiting the socio-psychopathic global corporatists who are parasites on the backs of humanity. My thanks to my guest tonight, Daniel Dungate from Cyprus, and Max Igan, currently in the UK, and Max will be joining me at AV7 this coming weekend. So thank you very much, and regular viewers, I'll see you in 45 minutes with Fracking Nightmare.